Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Q&A with the acclaimed director of Saint-Narcisse and Others, Bruce LaBruce. So excited to have you with us today. Thank you for being here.
Yay, my pleasure.
Yay, indeed. I'm sure our audiences are all very jazzed to have just walked out of your screening, and I'm sure they're anxious to hear more from you about this film and otherwise. So why don't you just start by telling me where did your journey with this film begin? Talk to me about your creative impetus for this project.
Yeah, it started quite a long time ago. I made a feature film in Quebec, in Canada, the French-speaking province, in 2012, called Gerontophilia, and I started working with a Quebec producer, and it was kind of the first film that I made with government financing, Sodac and Quebec Telefilm, and with a union crew and all that, and a somewhat bigger budget. So this is kind of a follow-up to that. It's with the same producer, same financing, and the story itself I started thinking about right after Gerontophilia, which is about intergenerational gay love. It's between a relationship between an 80-year-old man and an 18-year-old boy. The 18-year-old boy is a gerontophile who has kind of sexual fetish for the elderly. And for this project, again, I'm revisiting the idea of the kind of family of taboos and kind of forbidden kinds of love within a kind of gay or queer context. So I had the idea of wanting to make a twin movie. I feel like every director should make a twin movie at a certain point in their career, and it's so much fun. And I love The Parent Trap and the original and other twin movies. David Cronenberg's Dead Ringer and and then I thought it would be interesting to kind of use it as somewhat of a metaphor for narcissism, since narcissism is so prevalent now. And I applied the twincest story to the Narcissus myth. So it's kind of a modern retelling of the Narcissus myth. So yeah, it was percolating for a long time, and I started writing it, and then I brought in a Quebecois screenwriter, Martin Gerard, and we worked on it together, and it just finally came together, last year. So.
Yeah, fabulous. And you can really see how it speaks to Gerontophilia and a lot of your other work. And I'm curious if you can dig a little bit more into how this film, of course, and many of your films sort of takes a really head-on approach to addressing taboo. What do you think it is about film and your films that make it such the proper media to address taboo and to sort of unearth what it means in our culture?
Well, I mean, all my favorite filmmakers are people who've really tackled really difficult subject matter, and both kind of in the avant-garde tradition and also in the camp tradition. So I mean, you have people like Kenneth Anger and Jack Smith and Warhol and the Kuchar brothers and Kurt McDowell and lots of people, Peter DeRome and Wakefield Poole, who all made kind of avant-garde films that stood as art films, but they also really pushed kind of this idea of taboo, and especially within a gay context. With the liberation gaze, sex was such a central part of the whole movement, and it was a very militant expression of sex. And it was also exploring all sorts of sexual configurations that had previously been either ignored or kind of that were super deep underground. So it kind of brought a lot of that stuff to the surface, and it was about challenging the conventions of society, the sexual conventions. It was about questioning the idea of monogamy and the nuclear family and marriage, and kind of like the opposite of where we are today. But but it was also acknowledging the kind of the romance of the outsider and people who don't conform to the dominant order. And um, so yeah, and in Saint-Narcisse, I mean, it is a taboo, a social taboo, a cultural taboo to have sex with your twin. But
Hmm.
in terms of incest taboos, it's kind of the most understandable one, because most people could understand why, if you have like an exact replica of you sitting beside you, there might be a little bit of sexual tension there, maybe.
Sure, one could definitely imagine, and you help us imagine quite vividly. No, that's so interesting, and I think the film exactly digs into those things and those sort of configurations. And to me, it's also so much about family. It's interesting to hear you talk about that a little bit. And can you tell me more about what you think the film hopes to say, or what people might walk away with in terms of the ideas about family and the sort of layered tensions that you bring in, the dynamics with the mother and with adoption and with the twins.
Yeah, it's kind of a complex narrative in terms of
Hmm.
the family. I mean, I've kind of set up two parallel families in the film. So you
Yeah.
have Beatrice and her world, where she's like this Earth Mother. She's like kind of Wicca. She's
Hmm.
kind of a witchy woman. She smokes pot. She's kind of hippie-ish. And she's very much. The film is set in 1972, so she's
Hmm.
very much part of that idea of um, of um, uh, of challenging the ideas of what constitutes a family, or what or a sexual partner. So she ends up kind of falling in love with the daughter of her dead lover, and who's an exact replica of her daughter. So or of her lover.
Hmm.
So it gets a bit confusing, because it's almost like Beatrice is a mother figure to this girl, but also a lover figure. Um, and that whole world is, and then of course the twin Dominique comes and disrupts the whole thing, which is partly reference to the movie The Fox with Sandy Davis. And then the other world is Father Andrew, which is like, he's the father figure. He's the stern kind of like authoritarian.
Hmm.
He's more cultured. He's more in a more rigid environment, and he does some kind of weird drug. We don't know what it is, but it's not pot, whatever it is. And he he makes the boy call that he's in a who's he's sexually exploited and is now in a relationship with. He makes him call him father, and so there's kind of double, triple incest kind of
Hmm.
story going on there. And for me, it's all based on Freud's idea of family romance,
Hmm.
which is his theory about the sexual tensions within the nuclear family, the Oedipal complex and all that kind of thing. Where so in my film, I wanted to acknowledge those kinds of sexual attractions within a family, but instead of making people feel guilty about it or
Hmm.
shameful and there's something wrong with me, and this is sick and perverted. I mean, it's kind of a, a somewhat tongue-in-cheek but romantic kind of view of these kinds of taboos, which sometimes are perhaps enforced much too strictly,
Hmm.
and don't acknowledge that there can be some kind of sexual chemistry between people who are related, even if it's not acted upon. So
Of course, yeah, and I feel like you bring so much, yes, so much good nature and charm and humor to it. It makes it feel like something that opens up a conversation,
mm,
which I think is so important. And you mentioned, of course, the film is set in 1972. What to you about the 70s was the right sort of setting for this story?
yeah, well, I'm a huge fan of that era of filmmaking. So especially USA, Canada filmmaking, the late 60s and the 70s. So quite one, I was referencing The Fox, I mentioned it, and also the Robert Altman movie Images, which is another kind of doppelganger movie.
Mm-hmm.
um, you know the movies of that era were also challenging the conventions of of Hollywood and mainstream narrative cinema. the narrative conventions, the thematic conventions, this idea of that family always had to be, and home always had to be reinforced at the end of the film. Whereas in the late 60s and 70s, quite often the families would be broken apart, characters would be alienated, they'd end up in some kind of situation where they were uh, going off by themselves um, and kind of challenge, sort of rejecting all the demands that the society tried to put on them, like to behave sexually, to be family oriented, to be religious, go to church and all that kind of stuff. And also the narratives were reflected that, so they were also quite fractured or kind of complicated narratives. There's one Canadian filmmaker in particular who's from Quebec. His name is Paul Almond, and he was married to Geneviève Bujold, and they made a trilogy together of 3 films that I'm referencing here. There were quite often like dark films about ghosts from the past and kind of with incestuous undertones and kind of also often nature, set in nature, and nature as the force of like of unbridled kind of the id, like sexual energy. And there was this one film I saw on TV as a kid by Paul Almond called Act of the Heart, where Donald Sutherland plays a priest and Geneviève Bujold plays a girl who falls in love with him, and they end up having sex on the altar of the church, and then she ends up at the very end of the film going to a park, dousing herself with gasoline and setting herself on fire. So as the credits roll, and I was a kid when I saw this movie on TV, and it freaked me out, and it really, it really began for me a whole quest into this idea of what is it about religion and about repression and about that makes that's related to sex, and
Right.
how religious and sexual ecstasy are kind of the same, come from the same place, and why is there so many fetishes and perversions in amongst the Catholic saints, and all that kind of thing. So yeah, so that all had to do with setting it in that era. It's really kind of an homage to Quebecois film from the 70s.
Yeah, I feel like you've given us such a rich watch list, even just in this Q&A. I'm sure everyone can take notes and go find all the films you're talking about. I think, and I see clearly the influences there that really make something that's in conversation with a lot of these films from the 70s and on these topics. It's really exciting. Yeah. Can you tell me what it was like to work with an actor and in this doppelganger situation? What was that actually like in production and on set?
Well, I mean, originally, of course, I kind of toyed with the idea of casting twins, but just really impossible to find, twins who would be good enough actors who would also be intimate with each other on screen.
Right.
So, pretty early on, we decided we'd cast one actor for both roles. It was really challenging. I'd never really done special effects to that degree before.
Yeah.
We tried to keep them as old school as possible. So a lot of it is using body doubles and split screen. But of course, the technology now is so great. We would have a live mixer on set, or even if it was outdoors, where I could film the actor on one side and then reposition him on the other with the body double, so that the eye lines I could see on monitor and really match the eye lines exactly. And so, and we did use some limited CGI. There's about maybe 8 or 9 face replacement shots. But, for the making love scene, for example, between the twins, I really wanted to have this kind of like real earthy kind of like realism to it. So, it's the actor and his body double. So we had to find a body double who is like, the actor Felix is so great. I mean, he's straight identified, but he was just so open to everything and open to the challenge, and very generous with, with showing his body and and so we found a body double who he's a dancer, I think, and who has a very open physicality, and he had no problem with like physical intimacy with the other actor. So yeah, that was an important element of it. But of course, I really worked with Felix quite closely about in terms of developing the two distinct kind of characters of the twins, so that even with body language and
yeah. It was such an impressive performance. The duality was, yes, very, very present, very, very fully baked. That's all our time today, Bruce, but thank you again so much for joining us. I'm so proud to present your film, and I'm so glad you're part of Damn These Skills. Thanks to everyone who joined us, and we'll catch you soon.
Great, thank you.